Welcome to the Creating High Quality Skincare webinar by Covelo, where we'll be exploring how understanding the consumer and skin biology drives product success. If you're not familiar with Covelo, they're the world's largest ingredient platform, totally free to use, where you can discover ingredients and get the information you need to speed up product development. My name's Jen, and I run the SciComm platform, the EcoWell, and I'll be moderating this session. While you're entering here, let us know where you're from in the chat. So you should be able to see that to the right. There's a little toggle, so talk to us there. And also, while you're there, I want to draw your attention to the Q&A toggle. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, please put your questions there. And, even if it's just like skincare formulation in general, not maybe specifically something we've talked about, this would be a really good place to ask those questions. So ask it in the Q&A. I'll be keeping track of the Q&A throughout this presentation. So ask it, and then that'll direct when I am asking your questions at the live Q&A at the end of this presentation. I've also just started a poll. So now if you look three things over from the chat in interactions, this should have come up for you. So we're interested in learning more from you about some of the challenges that you experience with respect to skincare for product development. So please take the time to answer those questions. Thank you so much. And as mentioned, there's going to be a Q&A. I'm leaving lots of time for Q&A at the end, probably is going to be about 20 minutes. And to help unpack this conversation, I really love the spectrum of perspectives that we have here today to give the topic justice. So we've got a cosmetic chemist perspective with Lanisa Mahon, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Cincinnati for their cosmetic science program. And then at CLR Berlin, we've got two technical perspectives, one from technical marketing, which is Suzanne Kolosova, and then one from the technical ingredient perspective, which is Harold van der Hoeven. And so I'll get right to it with my first question. And this one will be directed to Lanisa. From your experience as a formulator, what do consumers most often look for in skincare products that define it as a good or effective product?
So first of all, I want to say thank you for having me here. And to answer your question, for a consumer to think something is a good product, it's kind of two things. First thing is you have to have those results. And if you say that your particular product is going to address a particular concern, it has to address that concern. The issue with that is that these things take time. You're not going to see results with skin overnight. So, in order for a product to generate a result, it has to be used over the course of a bit of time because it takes about 2 weeks for your stratum corneum to turn over and about 4 weeks for the rest of your skin to turn over. And that can be, a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on your age. So in the meantime, while you're waiting for those results, you have to have a product that feels acceptable for the consumer to use so that the consumer will continue to use it consistently so that they can get those results. So it's a little bit of a balancing act between kind of what the consumer wants while still getting those results.
And so thinking about what do consumers want, you also have to be mindful of, as Lanisa was alluding to, their initial impressions, where I think a lot of people don't take into account some of those initial drivers for user experience, which is the aesthetics, which are largely contributed just to by the choice of emulsifiers. And so there's so much to the formulation side of that. And now flipping over to the ingredient point of view, Harold, from an ingredient supplier perspective, how do consumer expectations drive ingredient development?
Yeah, basically we make active ingredients for the benefit of the consumer. So essentially, the consumer pays our salaries, you could say, and that means that our active ingredients should have a benefit for the consumer. Meaning that we start by looking at a consumer concern, let's say sensitive skin or wrinkles, and we try to understand how they perceive sensitive skin or wrinkles. What's their concern about them? What's their specific needs? And that's what everything starts with for us. And from that we go into, let's say, the cell biological and dermatological sciences. So a consumer has a concern, we recognize the concern. On basis of those, we define our scientific goals, meaning the activity our active ingredient needs to have. We then develop that product, hopefully see those results, get those results in the end, because it's lots of trial and error, lots of experimenting. We aim then, or we have then, and the end result being a product which works on the cell biological basis. We see effects on cell biology. We see effects in ex vivo situations on skin explants, human skin explants, obviously. And in the end, we then obtain real proof in vivo. And in vivo meaning instrumental methodologies we can use. And of course, also we look at, let's say, the satisfaction of the volunteers we have in our studies. And in the end, it's kind of a consumer to science, back to the consumer approach we have, which we think works very well in obtaining real active ingredients, real effective active ingredients, without, let's say, too much storytelling around it, just straightforward, a good active ingredient. That's the mentality we have with that.
And I really appreciate that approach of consumer to testing and science development and then back to the consumer. Because while you may get certain results with experimentation, the question is, will consumers actually notice those results? Are they significant enough for them to see the difference from this ingredient? Lots to that. Moving along to back to the formulator's perspective to Lenisa, how do consumer expectations influence the formulation of the final product?
So, consumer expectations are extremely important to the final product. We can even see, just like in a real life example, think about the CeraVe hydrating cleanser. It was at first formulated with in a way that it didn't foam. And a lot of, even though it does work and a cleanser doesn't need to actually foam to cleanse, a lot of consumers were like, I'm not sure how I feel about this because I don't feel like I'm getting clean because this isn't foaming on my skin, because that's just something that a consumer is used to. So consumer perception is extremely important. And I'm sure there are hundreds of more examples of where something had to go back and get reformulated because it wasn't received well by consumers. So you can have all the science, everything backing up your product, your ingredients. You can have done clinical trials, it can work, but if the consumer doesn't want to use it or doesn't like using it, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board and rethink about, the product and what you put in it.
And this creates some tension, I think, for brands along their product development. Another example to kind of highlight some of the things that Lenisa was talking about can be seen within the hair care space, where there's so many examples where you have products with very good proven efficacy being tested by consumer panels alongside maybe a product with inferior performance, but it has a fragrance. And then consumers often are driven by their initial impressions, and so they like the smell, and then so in those studies, oftentimes the fragranced product wins for consumer perspectives. But now you're competing with this rising perspective from consumers that they want fragrance-free products, not realizing that sometimes there's fragrance in the product that's not so even fragrant when we're talking about skincare that often smells like crayons without a little bit of fragrance. And so they don't really grasp the impact fragrance can have in their experience. And so there's just a lot to that. But I'm going to move along now to bring in the marketing perspective, and maybe you can speak more to some of the things, the tensions that I'm talking about. So, Susanna, there are many flash in the pan claims in cosmetics. What trendy traps do brands fall into, and how can they stand out in a crowded market?
Well, we see many claims in the market that are misleading or that don't actually say much. Um, a very popular one is clean beauty, which simply lacks a clear definition, and it implies not harmful, but ingredients harmful are banned in most regions anyway. And similarly, free from claims often refer to ingredients that are either already banned or harmless in the first place. And another issue is subjective claims like turns back the clock or makes you look 10 years younger, which cannot be measured or proven. And then there's fairy dusting, products featuring trending ingredients such as vitamin C or, CBD, but often in concentrations too low to be effective or in formulations where the ingredient cannot perform as intended. And while these claims might attract consumers to try a product once, what really matters are products that work and solve their problems. And consumers don't repurchase products when they are disappointed and when the promised results fail to convince them. And as a brand, you can take this approach, and in the short term, it may even pay off. We see examples of this all the time, but it's not a sustainable strategy, and nor is it consumer friendly. And successful products are not those that initially achieve high sales and media hype only to disappear after a year or so, but those that foster long-term customer satisfaction and customer trust. And at CLR, we focus on delivering proven efficacy and transparency, and we want to help brands create solutions that truly meet consumer needs and build lasting consumer relationships.
And then speaking of flash in the pan claims that have gained a lot of traction, like clean, sustainable, so many of them, something else that can be detrimental to brands is the regulatory landscape for what advertisement regulators view as deceptive. These claims that I've highlighted, clean hasn't necessarily been caught out yet. There's conversations that maybe it'll be a part of the FTC green guides when they eventually, whenever it happens, relaunch. It was supposed to launch a couple of years ago, but these generalized claims are unprovable. And according to the law, your claim has to be truthful, and that requires evidential support. How are you going to get the evidential support to support that claim? Moving along, there's so much to this conversation. I'll flip back to the formulator perspective to Lanisa. Could you share an example of how you've navigated these trendy traps in product development, or how you've observed other companies navigate these?
So I think the key in navigating some of these traps that brands tend to fall in is just communication. You have to be 100% honest about, you know, what claims they're trying to make, what claims that this product can actually address. And so what I see a lot is that that constant back and forth communication is so important, and being willing to share your knowledge and expertise with a brand to tell them and try to guide them towards, you know, what you believe they can make them a better product, or while still keeping what they want in mind. So telling them that, you might not be able to make, this claim or say this, but like, maybe we can put in something to address this, which is sort of like that. Like, you know, lending your expertise, making sure that they are knowledgeable about like what they're talking about, what the claims that they are trying to have this product address is so important. And sometimes, it can go as far as to saying like, we're not exactly aligned and maybe this isn't the best fit for a partnership, but usually I see that overcome with just open, honest communication between the brand and whoever is formulating.
And this brings up a very important point that I'm not sure the audience here. Also in the chat, let us know what your position is in the cosmetic space. Are you on the technical side of things? Are you a brand? Are you a marketer? Are you a consumer watching this? I'm super interested. especially with what I'm about to say, that a lot of consumers don't realize that the brand founders, especially when we're talking about indie brands, aren't necessarily the people that are developing the products. They're working with technical experts, such as cosmetic chemists, to do their product development. And so, because they don't have that technical background, a lot of the times, especially when they're new to the market, they fall into the same kind of misinformation traps that consumers do. And so then they sometimes make decisions that aren't, they don't have the long-term view that they would otherwise have if they had that technical perspective. And so then that kind of ends up biting them in the butt for their long-term success. And now flipping it back to Harold for the ingredient supplier standpoint, what are some common pitfalls brands face when developing skincare products, and how can CLR help them overcome these challenges?
Yeah, I think it's in line with what you just said just now. Basically, probably at In-Cosmetics next year, you're going to see at least 200 companies selling you or trying to sell active ingredients to the cosmetic industry. 200 companies, meaning the market is pretty saturated. And like cosmetic brands, we too have our fancy and shiny brochures and PowerPoint presentations and fantastic results. I'm saying that with a bit of a cynicism in my voice, maybe, but you know, everybody wants to have a piece of the pie. We all show great results, including us. Of course, we are showing our products in a good light. We want to sell the product to you. That's the business we're in. It's a pitfall though, because with so many suppliers showing so many beautiful diagrams and graphs to the cosmetic industry, where most of the people in the cosmetic industry have a hard time coping with all the stuff they need to be doing. You know, a cosmetic scientist needs to know about microbiology as well as rheology, as well as whatever perfume technology, etc., etc. But that should also, or that would also include dermatology and cell biology, and then knowing how to read in vivo results, clinical results shown in our fancy brochures and PowerPoints. And altogether, I guess it's too much for most people, and that means that is really a pitfall for the cosmetic scientists to really be aware of, as far as I'm concerned. And you know, I could say, don't believe a word I'm saying. No, of course not. But I do want to point out to be a critical thinker, at least when it comes to looking at results with active ingredients as presented by an active ingredient supplier. Otherwise, you're buying maybe just a bit of fairy dust and lots of beautiful words without really, you know, having effect and effectiveness, which is all about. And you're spending a lot of money on those active ingredients as well. So it's something to be very, very aware of.
Yeah, keep your skeptic's cap hat. For example, is that hydration claim from this ingredient driven by that wonderful extract, or is it driven from the glycerin or whatever other humectant base that is solving that extract? There's so much to ingredient data. You really have to keep your skeptic's cap on. Also, be mindful that the advertisement regulations that brands are beheld to, because they're consumer facing, aren't necessarily relevant to B2B ingredient suppliers. So be mindful of that. Now I'm going to ask this next question to everyone. You can speak to anything that I've just said or build on from this question. Why is understanding skin biology in the diversity of skin conditions essential for effective skincare? And can you provide some examples? Maybe we'll kick this one off with the marketing perspective again. Susanna, would you like to kick this one off?
Yeah. Um, I think if you don't understand the problem, you cannot solve it. And I think aging is a good example. You know, it's not just this single issue, but you know, a complex interplay of biochemical processes in the skin that are deeply interconnected. You know, including reduced collagen production, slower cell turnover, weakened skin barrier, and many more. And aging is also highly individual, influenced by genetic predisposition as well as environmental factors and lifestyle choices. And to address these challenges, it's important to understand the underlying skin biological processes and causes. Well, aging is basically an accumulation of damage in the skin. And one major contributor to this is, for instance, UV-induced damage. And what we do at CLR is study how this damage occurs and ask ourselves, how can we make skin cells more resilient to the effects of UV radiation? And by understanding the biological processes, we can work towards finding a solution and develop active ingredients that help counteract this particular cause of skin aging. And beyond aging, understanding the diversity of skin condition is equally critical for creating effective skincare solutions. And skin conditions such as dryness, sensitivity, irritation, influenced by various biological and environmental factors. And by understanding the specific mechanisms behind these skin conditions, we can develop active ingredients that address them effectively and help consumers achieve more resilient, healthier, and, in the end, younger looking skin.
And now flipping over to the technical ingredient perspective, Harold, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's important to set your goals when you're formulating a product and you want to have a certain activity and a certain claim you want to make. You need to formulate and define your goals. And a nice example possibly is acne-prone skin, oily skin. So we can make anti-acne claims, of course, on cosmetics nowhere, but many cosmetic products are developed for acne-prone skin or oily skin, and these kinds of products, which you need to ask yourself, what do you want to achieve for the consumer? Consumer probably expects this product to reduce sebum, reduce the likelihood of pimples and pustules and so on, forming, breakouts and so on. And that's where you just then start to define your goals. Do you want to kill the bacteria, the acne bacteria? It's not as easy as that nowadays, of course. Now, in the past, we wanted to kill Cutibacterium acnes. Now we know that there are some phylotypes, but do you want to really touch them? Or is it more inflammation you want to reduce, like on a daily basis, keep skin calm? You want maybe barrier function to be strong and improved if it's not strong. These kinds of factors, there's so many degrees of freedom, so many parameters to think of. And I think that, if you understand let's say the pathology or the pathophysiology of a certain problem, you can then start to define your real goals and, set priorities. What is important, what is less important. I think that's a very important way of looking at things.
And then last but not least, for the formulator perspective, Lanisa?
So to kind of echo what they both said, like skin biology and knowing that skin biology is extremely important because you really can't address the problem unless you know what it is. So like I'm thinking about like melanogenesis, for example, and hyperpigmentation products. There are so many different ways that you can kind of target the melanocyte to kind of try to have the same effect. So you can increase skin cell turnover to get rid of that pigment that's been deposited. You can inhibit like tyrosinase and it stop melanin production. So in order to make an effective product, and I mean, it's the same thing in like, say, the pharmaceutical industry, right? Your whole first set of activities is trying to understand that biology, figure out that target so that you can find a meaningful way to impact it or hit it so that it can actually give the effect that you or the consumer wants to see. So really understanding that biology and how that influences the condition is so important because without a target, you don't, where do you start? So biology is extremely important.
And to understand that, you have to have some evidential support to kind of like start somewhere. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, whatever, ingredient data isn't necessarily being published in peer-reviewed literature, and whether or not that peer-reviewed literature is relevant to the specific ingredients, like there's so many different vitamin C ingredients out there. Is that relevant to this specific delivery system, especially in the context of this formulation? And so at a certain role or a certain place, you have to then turn to the ingredient supplier data. So I guess this leads me along really well to the next set of questions. So I'm going to ask it first, or direct this line of questioning first to Harold from the ingredient supplier standpoint. I'm sorry for it to be now very leading this question, but what is the role of ingredient suppliers in helping brands develop effective skincare products?
I think our main role in this relationship is just guiding our customers, our partners, you could say. Of course, every supplier wants to be a partner of their customer, but that's essentially what I'm trying to say. We would love to be seen as a partner by our customers and as a kind of a consultant. You mentioned peer-reviewed literature, but there are many different qualities of peer-reviewed literature as well. So I'm on PubMed every day almost, and I see lots of different qualities of peer-reviewed literature, and so you need to be very careful with that as well. So essentially, being that cosmetic scientist trying to formulate a beautiful, effective formulation is something which is really difficult to do. And, I used to be a formulator myself, and I didn't understand all those UV filters. So I asked my favorite supplier to inform me on how to combine UV filters to get the most out of the UV filters, get the best SPF and these kinds of things. That's what I also would see with active ingredients. I would love, and that happens a lot, but possibly not often enough, for our customers to come to us with their questions. We're working on project XYZ. This is what we want to achieve. This is what we want to claim. This is the type of consumer we have or are aiming for. What would be our best result, or what would be our best approach? And this would be an approach which not necessarily will be more expensive than in any other approach. I would say the formulation would possibly be cheaper per kilo or per LBS or whatever unit you use when you know exactly how to approach this formulation. And it's not just active ingredients, it's also getting those active ingredients penetrated into the skin, meaning you need to have certain ingredients in the formulation which allow for that to happen. So altogether, I think it's a joint effort, you could say. And that's what I think, or what I ideally hope to be the situation.
Yeah, this reminds me of my formulator days working with ingredient suppliers. And when I had an issue with, for example, emulsifier, something is not quite right. I can't get this system to be stable. Then it's such a good resource from ingredient suppliers to be able to reach out to their technical person, explain what you have going on, and get a recommendation. Like, have you thought about adding this one ingredient? Oh, I see this other ingredient that you're using isn't going to play well, and this is why. Try this. Or maybe it's even a mixing speed. So yeah, that consulting aspect from ingredient suppliers, I think, is something that people, especially formulators, really need to take advantage of. And now, to that formulator perspective, Lanisa, what do you find valuable when working with ingredient suppliers?
I find valuable is that a lot of the ingredient suppliers, especially on the technical side, are extremely knowledgeable. And they can, as you said, like as both of y'all said, they act as consultants. If you're doing a particular formula and you're having an issue, you can, if you have a good technical person with your ingredient supplier, you can reach out to them and be like, hey, I'm trying to formulate this particular product and I'm having issues with X, Y, or Z, and they can help give you a solution. Or even going back to like actives, kind of like what Harold said, like sometimes the brochures are a lot of fluff because they're not always being picked up by somebody with a lot of like technical expertise, and it needs to be kind of at a level where a lot of people can understand it. But me being a scientist, I like to know a little bit more the nitty gritty. Like, okay, how did you test this? What did you test? Like, what were the test parameters and methods? And so I also think that talking to your ingredient supplier can help you kind of comb through that data and really start to differentiate like the fluff from what's real. So your technical ingredient supplier is so helpful, and they are like a consultant for you in helping you create the best product that you can possibly create. So they're extremely, extremely useful.
And also thinking about the evidential support that you need to start thinking about right away when you're developing a product, so that you can build up kind of a library to substantiate your claims. Another aspect I'm thinking of here, and the value of that, is like with sustainability related substantiation. It's such a trend right now that brands want to be more sustainable, but to do that, to pursue that, especially in the context of formulations here that we're talking, you need that data support. But that's actually one of the biggest challenges, barriers in place for eco design, is actually getting evidential support for ingredient suppliers, rather than them just saying, yeah, we're sustainable, we're clean, we're natural. Like, what is actually the support that I can use to start to build up my substantiation here? And now, from the CLR perspective, maybe you can chime into something that I've just said on the sustainability front. I'm going to direct the question first to Susanna, but I'll ask the question first before I direct it, and it'll be both to Susanna and Harold. So my question is, how do you ensure the science behind formulations is communicated in a way that resonates with consumers? Could you offer some examples? And then again, by all means, feel free to chime in on what I've just said as well. Susanna, what do you think?
Well, yeah. Concerning the sustainability issues, it's really such a complex topic. The sustainability of a product doesn't mean that the company is sustainable. And there's a lot of factors that contribute to that, and starting from sourcing to manufacturing to water and energy, and small things like how do employees get to work, by bike or by car. It's a difference. So we try to share all the data, but it's tons of data, and we need to, we get the certificates, and we try to provide the data in a readable way, but it's a complex process, really. And yeah, I'm sorry, what was the question, Jen?
The question was, how do you ensure the science behind formulations is communicated in a way that resonates with consumers? And could you give us some examples?
Yeah, well, I feel like as the cosmetics industry as a whole, really, we have to admit that we've been somewhat slow to adapt in how we communicate science to consumers. And we often criticize social media as influencers for spreading misinformation or creating unnecessary fears, or even promoting harmful behaviors. And I think for some consumers, this created the impression that advertising lies to them, and that so-called experts on social media are the ones telling the truth. And I think what we need to do is stop complaining and really start listening. And social media audiences are telling us very clearly what they expect from a product, and also they tell us what they don't like. And we need to address consumer concerns about ingredients, about formulations, about sourcing, about sustainability, and take them seriously. And I think by reclaiming the narrative and being open, honest, transparent, and authentic in how we communicate, we can rebuild and maintain trust. And you know, um, at CLR, for example, we consider ourselves experts in the field of the skin microbiome and biotic and active ingredients, and actively participate in relevant discussions, and topics like pre, pro, postbiotics, and are an area where we like to contribute with our expertise, and especially because these terms are often misused or misunderstood. And our goal is to bring clarity to these debates and provide accurate science-based knowledge, and always hoping that the brands we work with incorporate this knowledge into their communication and product development.
And then Harold.
Yeah, a bit to add, not so much, to be honest, because it's all about honesty and transparency. Transparency, as far as I'm concerned, and thinking back of all those shiny brochures and beautiful PowerPoint presentations, and maybe the word hero ingredient, which we hear often. There is no such thing as a hero ingredient, by definition. Marketing wise, yes, but from an effectiveness point of view, There is absolutely not, depending on what you want to achieve as far as effectiveness is concerned. You need to find the right combination of ingredients, active ingredients in combination with ingredients which allow for penetration and these kinds of things to get to a real result. And just be honest about that. That's essentially what I think is important for us at CLR. We're not selling fairy dust. We're not selling shiny, nice things. We're selling an honest and effective active ingredient in a certain context, which ideally is combined with other ingredients to get to the best result. And yeah, it sounds a bit honest, you might say, or a bit boring, but that's how it is. That's science, people. You know what I mean? It's just how it is.
And then back to the marketing perspective, Susanna, how do you bridge the gap between complex skin biology and consumer-friendly messaging?
Mm. Um, I think, as I said earlier, listening is absolutely essential. And to create successful products, we must take consumer concerns seriously. And even if they might seem a bit unrealistic at first, and I don't know, for example, I want to get rid of my skin pores. May sound, ridiculous, but we need to ask, what is this person really trying to say? Typically they're referring to symptoms like pore size or color of pores, and from there we analyze the underlying biological processes, sebum production, inflammation, protein carbonylation, lipid oxidation, and by understanding these mechanisms, we develop active ingredients that effectively can address these issues. And when we communicate the solution back to the consumer, we need to be honest. We no, we cannot make pores disappear, and they exist for a good reason. But this active ingredient at this concentration and this formulation used over this period of time will make your pores less visible, and that is a promise.
And then flipping back over again to the ingredient supplier or technical ingredient perspective, Harold, can you share a case study of how CLR developed an active ingredient that aligns with skin biology and meets consumer demands?
Yeah, I'll keep it short as possible. We have a product called Anona Sense, which was developed 5-6 years ago. We launched 5-6 years ago, which was developed for treating or improving sensitive skin. 50+% of the people in the industrialized world perceive their skin to be sensitive. So we try to find out what that means. What is their perception? Is that redness? Is that more like neurogenic inflammation, itch, these kinds of things? We defined our goals based on that, scientific goals in the skin. But then we started realizing sensitive skin is not just, let's say, sensitive skin. It's also a burden to people. So it is something which has a negative effect on well-being, or it can have a negative effect on well-being. And that's what we looked at as well. So we looked at this let's say this connection between skin and brain, because well-being is of course in the brain. And then we started thinking, well, there's also like a feedback loop, because if we feel worse, then our skin gets worse too sometimes. When you're acne prone, you might get a breakout when you feel stressed, or eczema can also break out when people feel stressed. So there is that feedback loop between skin and brain back to skin. And that's what we then looked at with this ingredient, with Anona Sense. You look at all the stages within that feedback loop, in the end feeding back to the consumer, so to say. So we improve skin, and therefore we improve well-being, and through improving well-being we see a positive effect on skin and skin health again, and that's where we get the feedback loop. And I think that's a really nice example of how we, starting from the consumer, end up with an active ingredient which acts really on what consumers feel is very important to them when using skincare product, and that's well-being. So yeah.
And then flipping it back one more time over to the marketing perspective, Susanna, in an oversaturated market, How does CLR help brands stand out by focusing on consumer-centric product development?
Mhm. Well, I think the key is understanding your target consumers. For example, a very general concern is skin tone evenness, but a 20-year-old is talking about it very differently from a 70-year-old. And it's crucial to understand and speak the consumer's language. And that's why in marketing, we invest a lot of time in market research and the development of our trend concept and trend presentations. And from a business perspective, the success of our customer is our success. As mentioned earlier, a successful product is not one that is bought once out of curiosity, but one that is so good that is purchased again and again because it truly solves consumer problems. And this means understanding the problem, developing a solution, and communicating it to the consumer in a way that they understand. And relevance, authenticity, transparency are crucial. And it's also important to be clear about what a product can and cannot do while sharing the science behind it in an understandable way. And consumers appreciate honesty and reliability, and this helps create lasting connections and you know product and brand loyalty. And at CLR, we work to support brands in delivering solutions that truly meet expectations.
Now I have one more question before I flip over to the live Q&A. For everyone who's watching, I see there's 6 questions up now. Now is the time to ask your questions. I am paying attention to the Q&A, but my final question from myself is for all of you, what advice would you give to brands looking to better understand their consumers while staying true to the science behind skincare? Lanisa, would you like to kick this one off?
So advice that I would give to brands that are looking to both stay true to the consumer and the science, um, where I really think that this gap that we see between the consumer expectations and the science of products, where I really think that can be bridged is through marketing and communication. I was once an uninformed consumer of cosmetics, and you know, I found people in the industry who had really good perspectives and technical perspectives. Um, so I really think that where this can be bridged is through that marketing, through communication, that constant back and forth between whoever's formulating in the brand, and then the brand and the marketing department. They all have to work in kind of like a synergy to try to bridge that gap, because it can be difficult. Because I mean, especially with social media nowadays, almost anybody can get online and say anything just about without evidence. So we really have to combat that through the marketing and through like platforming people who have that technical expertise that can help bridge that, that science plus that community, that consumer expectation. So you have to work all together to try to bridge that gap.
To the technical ingredient perspective, Harold.
Fully agree with Lanisa that in the sense of that the brand marketing and R&D should act in union and in synergy with each other, and not try to understand each other. That's one. So yes. And from a technical point of view, let's say the talent to be a critical thinker, and maybe the talent to be acting like a 4-year-old, meaning asking questions constantly to your suppliers and also to your formulation, in the sense of what's happening here and why is this unstable. Ask those questions constantly: how, why, when, where, what. All those questions, ask them constantly to yourself, to me, to us, as an active ingredient supplier. That leads to better and effective cosmetic products, in my view. And that's something some people lack sometimes, and that's something I really want to point out in that context.
And then last but not least, Susanna.
Yeah, My advice would be to start truly listening to your consumer, understand their concerns, their needs, and how they talk about their skin, because it is the foundation of creating products that are relevant and meaningful to them. And at the same time, stay grounded in the science. A product that delivers on its promise, backed by evidence, builds lasting satisfaction. And it's also essential to communicate clearly and honestly, be transparent about what your product can do and why it works. Consumers don't need exaggerated claims; they need trust, sincerity, and solutions that genuinely improve their skin health. And always aim to connect the dots between consumer insights, scientific expertise, and I think this is where innovation happens, and what sets truly successful brands apart.
And so now it's time for Q&A. I'll answer the first one real quick, and then I'll move along to a technical question that we received earlier. I really like this function on this Q&A where you can upvote questions too. So if you in the chat see a question you really want answered, upvote it, and then I'll be looking for the most upvoted questions as well. So this question is from Agnes, who asked, where can we find CLR Berlin ingredients? I'm curious about the one mentioned in the webinar. So a really easy way for you to learn more about CLR Berlin is through the platform Covelo, who is providing this webinar today. It's totally free to use. So there is a search function in their platform. If you go make an account and then it's free, then go in their search bar, you can search CLR Berlin, and then you'll be able to see their offering of ingredients. And then there's also options for you to access some of their technical materials. So then you can access that. And if there's not the technical materials that you need, then you can also be potentially connected with CLR Berlin to learn more. Okay, so I'm going to then ask another question, the technical one that I had mentioned. I think this is the most upvoted one from Niha. For R&D scientists, what is the most important aspect of the active which helps make the selection decision? Is it strong, vivo, vitro, and technical, the supplier relationship, or trends on the market? What drives the decision to select one active from the other? And I think this would be interesting from both Harold and Lanisa's perspective. So I'm going to ask it to Lanisa first. From the formulator perspective, what do you think?
Okay, so I really love this question because I deal with kind of research on the in vitro side in my PhD. And in my opinion, what helps me make the decision, I'm an evidence-based person, right? So at the end of the day, I want to see the evidence. The issue with in vitro tests is that that's not really what happens when you apply something to the skin. And so in vitro, I'll see an in vitro result depending on the methodology. To me, in vitro says that, all right, if this particular active ingredient can reach this part of the skin with this cell, it might be able to exert that effect. But what really matters for the active is the formulation, number one, of how it's going to work. But even before that, when you're picking the active, for me, what does matter is the technical data, but you also have to kind of listen to trends in the market. And so this is where what I was trying to kind of hint on earlier. So like, for example, there's a million and one, everybody wants a new active ingredient. Everybody's creating a new active ingredient. That doesn't exactly mean that that active ingredient is going to work like, you want it to work. So sometimes, you do listen to the trend and you're like, all right, okay, let me incorporate this active ingredient, but these consumers still want this particular effect. So I need to throw in another active that will help bolster that effect or that's proven to address that effect. So you do kind of have to listen to market trends, but even if you notice like a lot of those trendy active ingredients, one that I can think of off the top of my head right now is maybe like tranexamic acid, for example, as a hyperpigmentation agent. We rarely ever see tranexamic acid just be in a product alone. It'll be like tranexamic acid plus niacinamide, which has already been proven to address like hyperpigmentation, or tranexamic acid plus some other form of acid like a glycolic acid that'll help increase that skin turnover so that that pigmentation fades faster. So it you have to listen to both trends, but at the end of the day, you also do have to look at that data, and that will kind of help go back and forth to say, all right, this is trendy, but I might need something else to really get this effect that the consumers want.
So if you see little wisps, my cat is right now right above my camera, and her whiskers are right above the camera. Uh, and now this kind of brings up, I'll just quickly answer it before I switch over to Harold. Question from Gloria. Speaking of trendy ingredients driven maybe by consumer perceptions, are natural alternatives to retinoids, retinol, such as squalane, equally as effective? And so I may urge you to look at the body of literature and like the reason why the cosmetics industry looks to retinol as that like gold standard. It's because the level of evidence to support its use in those specific functions that is not existent for squalane and is also not as pronounced for some of the alternatives. Bear in mind how, like Lanisa was saying, just because an ingredient has a lot of evidence doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate to the formulation outcome. And so there also has to be consideration of that for the formulation and then validation for the efficacy in the context of the formulation. And now for that previous question to Harold, what do you think?
Oh, gee, what was the previous question again? No, no, good. Active ingredients. I think the word says it all. They have an activity. So and trends. I think I'm not a native English speaker, but there must be a definition of trends which kind of includes they come and they go. You know. So I think that's something which we have to just look at like critically. A trendy ingredient is a trendy ingredient. It will go at some point because something else will pop up. And then you have the real active ingredients which make a difference for the final formulation, make a difference in which is perceivable by the consumer, which is measurable with instruments, but above all, which is perceived by the consumer. And that's where you need to prove when you're a cosmetic scientist. You want real proof. And as Lanisa said, in vitro is nice, but will it go to the melanocytes or the fibroblasts to boost collagen or reduce pigmentation or these kinds of things? In vivo proof is of the essence. Otherwise, you don't have an active ingredient. You could put it bluntly. That's one. And then you need to have kind of the skill to understand what happened in this study. How was this study designed? We have anti-wrinkle effects on 25-year-olds. Is that relevant for your consumer? And does that also say that 50-year-olds will also profit from that? All these things. That's why I'm always referring to my inner 4-year-old. How, what, why, etc. So it's all about the real proof, and the real proof comes from well-designed, relevantly designed in vivo studies.
Well addressed from the marketing perspective. So this is from Agnes, who asks, talking about customer expectation, how do you educate your customers about the time it can take before they see results? Some customers can get upset when their product doesn't work after using it one time, and often consistency is key in cosmetics. Susanna, what's your take?
Well, I think you can, either just say it, and well, we just look at it, we test an ingredient and we just look at it. How long does it take until brands have see results? And but as a brand, I think you can directly tell them, or what you can do is by packaging sizes, make or by adding benefits that are like moisturizing. You use a moisturizer every day for a long time, and that might be my suggestions.
You're muted.
You muted, Jen.
Oops. This next question comes from Avita, who asks, is CLR small brand friendly in terms of MOQ of raw materials? And by MOQs, we're referring to minimum order quantity. Susanna, maybe you're I feel like either of you could answer this, but I'll ask it to Susanna. Could you chime in?
Howard, I think you know this better.
Yeah, we are extremely friendly when it comes to our MOQs, I think. So the answer is yes. We have small packs. Some ingredients we sell in 1 kilo units, and others in 5 kilo units, and so that should fit most cosmetics producers, I guess.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of smaller brands.
This next question I'll direct to Lenisa. This is from Hadis. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Is it acceptable for brands to claim that, for example, its active ingredient is honey in its formula, and have certain benefits while the concentration of it is less than 0.5%? Maybe before you get started, I might also say that, like, are they making the claim contains honey, or are they attaching a benefit to the honey? I feel like there's a lot of like nuance to this, but then also the aspect that you don't necessarily need high percentages to drive a certain formulation efficacy outcome. Really good example of this. I'm just speaking to things that I hear a lot from consumers where they think, for example, they need more, say, retinol, where there is a return on investment for the addition, because if you have too much, then the efficacy may actually go down, and then the irritancy potential may go up. And so it's actually better in that specific case to have less. Lenisa, though, what do you think?
Yeah, so you pretty much hit it right on the head. I was actually going to bring up retinol in response to this question because I'm guessing honey is just like a generic stand-in for kind of any active ingredient. What really determines the benefit, besides the formulation, kind of like what I talked about, is you have to kind of look at the clinical data. Not every single active ingredient is going to have the exact same efficacy at the same concentration. And kind of what Jen said, retinol is a great example of that. Like retinol can be used at less than 1%, and I think low key less than 0.5%, and still be effective. Whereas if you have, say, like niacinamide at 0.5%, and they're like, oh, well, this formula has niacinamide and it'll do da 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 at 0.5%, you can kind of look at that and just say, will that really do that? Like, it's saying that it will do that. So it really depends on the particular active. For most actives, though, I would say that 0.5%, unless we're talking about retinol, that would be fine. But like for other active ingredients, if it was at 0.5%, I might kind of side eye it. I would have to see clinical data to show that it is effective at that low percentage.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I'm going to ask it quickly. I really liked this question from Jenny Sarah. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. For small brands without the means to test the efficacy of the final product, how can a formulator effectively communicate with the marketing team to be more cautious, responsible, ethical about the product's claims? And since this is kind of taking on that formulator perspective, I'm going to ask this final one to Lenisa again.
Okay. So there are a lot of different claims that you can make in regards to a product. You can just make a claim on the ingredients that can be backed up by like data, and the evidence that already exists in literature. But this is where I say like that working in synergy with your marketing department and your R&D really comes into play, because the marketing team cannot make outlandish claims because the FTC will come collect you. And so you do have to really talk to your marketing team, because I've also seen marketers kind of take a ball and like really run with it, go to the moon with it, in terms of the claims. But there are different ways that you can like, not all testing of your product has to be extremely expensive. There's different tiers. You don't have to do a clinical study with instrumentation or clinical grading. Maybe instead of doing that, you just do a consumer perception study where, you give a bunch of consumers a product and ask them like what they like about it, or have their questionnaire. So really, the marketing team, it's kind, you have to kind of have that communication to say like, hey, so this claim, we might have to reword this. And like sometimes it's not completely throwing out the claim, maybe sometimes it's like rewording it, to say something just like kind of the same but slightly different, or maybe choosing a less expensive testing method for, to hit that claim. Oh, you're muted, Jen.
That was really great. Sorry, I was hitting the wrong button. That was a really great take home. And I think a really great finish to this webinar. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today to share your expertise. Thank you so much to Covelo for including me, and CLR Berlin for including me as a moderator. And thank you to all of you in the audience for attending and being so engaged in the Q&A. I loved hearing all your answers, and very interesting to hear your perspectives from the poll that we had earlier. So just so you know, you'll be receiving an email shortly with the email addresses of all the panelists. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to any of us directly. The email also includes links to learn more about CLR Berlin ingredients on Covelo, and also like a reminder, if you're not already signed up to use Covelo's platform, it's free. And now if you want to search any ingredient, you can just use their search function in their database, access technical materials, and it's a great resource. There's no reason not to be on it. And finally, when it's ready, you'll also receive access to the panel replay. And that's all I've got. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday.